Questions? And Rob, you want to ask one here from one of the folks in the audience?
Yeah, kind of a practical question here. How do you feel about mowing of road ditches before August 1st? That's pretty prime bird habitat out there, and it's, if you read the letters to the editor section in Outdoor News, there's a lot of folks that object to that. Any thoughts, gentlemen? Why don't we start with you, Congressman? You spent a lot of time in farm country.
This is a stickier question than fixing health care, I can tell you, for those of you in this room. Full disclosure, and this is again, this office is not a platform for my personal ideology, but I've expressed it in farm country, I've expressed it at Farm Fest, and I'll express it in front of you. I have deep concerns with the mowing. I have deep concerns with the purpose of it. I have certainly for control of noxious weeds. I do know that there's an issue here of the hay and the farmers and the things that's happening, but I think from a management perspective and how we can do this, I am certainly open to us having a robust discussion in this state of how ditch mowing is done and the purpose of it as it impacts many areas.
The way this has been handled is another good example of the arrogance of state government and our state agencies. And it's crazy that when I travel around greater Minnesota, I hear as much about ditch mowing as I do about taxes or health care. That is how poorly this whole thing has been managed. And once again, it is government telling private landowners in many cases what they can and can't do with their own property. And so I think that we should allow people to do what they need to do to farm.
You should add, some of the ditches are public.
Yes, they are. Some are.
Okay. Here's a question from somebody in the audience. Funding for Minnesota DNR in bonding dollars has been lacking in recent years, especially since Lessard-Sam's Council and that amendment passed. Would you include greater funding for DNR? And I know it's an open question. I suppose it depends on the bonding request, but have at it.
Yeah, it totally depends on the bonding request. I think that our bonding bill should be spent on either regional or statewide projects of significance, and I think the most important part of that we should first focus on the infrastructure we already have in place in the state. So let's make sure through bonding that our roads, those that can be bonded for, are adequate. Let us make sure that the buildings that government already owns are safe and adequate. And then water infrastructure in this state, in parts of the state at least, is absolutely desperate for some investment. And I think I think those are the top three priorities for a bonding bill. Past that, I'm willing to look at other things. But again, they need to be of either regional or statewide significance. I think in the past few years we've expanded the bonding bill to a lot of pet projects that probably don't belong in a bonding bill.
Also, there's a philosophy out there that believes they can use the lottery dollars and the Lessard-Sam's to do the basic function. That wasn't what it was designed for. It was for enhancement and growth. And I think all of a sudden now you start seeing the ability to raid those funds to have them out. That's just a way that you can go back home and say, no, I didn't have to vote for any more spending or whatever. I just took it from this enhancement. So yes, I support that. I think we made a mistake when interest rates were historically low of not catching up on some of our projects, not getting some of the things done. But I think it does make sense to do the bonding.
We had a question from the crowd, someone asking about would recruitment programs, mentoring programs, those have definitely grown in popularity. The DNR's got several people working there who are in charge of recruiting the future generations of hunters. I think most people would agree there's been some success. Jeff, would that remain a priority if you were governor? Is that the role of government, to be out kind of recruiting hunters?
Yeah, I think that can be the role of government, and I would be supportive of it. I think I love to see when this generation, the next generation, is actually getting involved in outdoor activities, and we have young sportsmen and sportswomen, whether it's clay shooting or something else. So sure.
Access to those facilities, walk-in access for hunting, making sure there's enough birds. My kids get a little bummed out if they don't see something walking, then they don't want to go back and play with the iPad or something. And I think modeling it from a governor who hunts, who's been out there with you, who trap shoots with you, I think those things can make a difference as we start to show this isn't an either or. I'm really worried about this idea, and it does come back around guns, that we're creating this divide, not just urban-rural, but those who firearms owners, hunts, and I think that ability to get kids in with, again, we asked it earlier, shooting ranges, shooting sports activities, walk-in access to lands that are near their house, we should be doing those things because, again, For many of us in this room, it shaped who we are. It shapes how we view the world. It shapes how we view conservation. It shapes some of the best memories we had with our families. And I would hate to see kids miss out on that because we're not making the proper decisions.
Here's an interesting question. Involves omnibus bills. Now, we've all been caught up in that. We have omnibus bills that include things from stupid muskie regulations to wonderful state park regulations, and what's the legislature or the governor supposed to do? The question is, would you require clean, standalone bills from the legislature and get away from these junk omnibus, throw everything in one bill deal?
Yeah. Well, this is one where I'm in full agreement with Jeff on this. I think he's articulated it very well. He brought up one yesterday that I cheered and clapped for. He said if you go to a special session, nobody gets paid for that because you do your damn work when you're supposed to. I totally agree with that philosophy, and I think the way you get to that is not just hopefulness. It goes back to that leadership philosophy of building the coalition on the front end. I don't think you should be waiting to see the governor's budget when he unveils it on February 18th and everybody's waited with bated breath. That's what's in there. Why should you be surprised what's in the state budget? Because you should have been a part, or these organizations should be a part of what's written in there. So I absolutely agree with that. I think Paul Thiessen had some good ideas. This idea of an 800-page bill at the last minute, crammed with all kinds of things. I'm not naive. You have to compromise sometimes in for efficiencies, but they must be done in public. They must be done with eyes on these things. They must be done with buy-in. And again, we must break the cycle. There should never be a special session. Do your work, and again, if you can view compromise as a virtue and not a vice, we can get there, because we do have those shared values.
I will veto any omnibus garbage bill that I believe violates the single subject rule of the Constitution. Article 4, Section 17 of the Minnesota Constitution says that every bill has to have one single subject, and we have abused that on a bipartisan basis. The courts have been unwilling to enforce it because they don't want to get involved in the legislative process. So if we want to solve the problem, we have to have a governor who's willing to do it regardless of who sends you that bill, and I will.
Rob, I have a question. This goes back to some of the gun discussion, but it was in the paper this morning, Mr. Walz, about you would ban assault rifles, and I go, oh wow, what is his definition of an assault rifle? Because as you hope know, a lot of confusion out there.
Yeah, no, and many of you know. No, I was not there at this position, and I said, someone said, well, I changed his position for political convenience or whatever. I've been voting for several years after background checks, the no-fly, no-buy with some of the terrorist pieces, the bump stock piece, whatever, and when this one came up, I've shot these things. I've shot military rifles for 24 years in the military. I know when people say semi-automatics, they don't know that that means my A400 that I trap shoot with, and they lump these things together. But we're going to get into a very, very hard spot with the idea of flooding of the market with cheap semi-automatic rifles, with printed rifles that we're going to see, and this is nothing new that just got in the news. All of us saw the 3D printing piece coming, and we're going to have a discussion on what people can have. What I've said on this is, if you own these things now, you're going to keep them. We need to have a discussion going forward, though, about what is happening and why are these the choice. I know the statistics for all of you in here, that it's a handgun that's going to be used in a crime. It's a handgun that's going to be gained illegally, not by a background check. I understand all those things. I don't think that removes our responsibility to have an open discussion of what this looks like in the public, and that it doesn't somehow make it impossible for anybody to talk about ways to reduce the violence with them.
Well, my concern about when people say they're going to ban semi-automatic weapons or assault rifles is everybody's definition of that is different, and oftentimes it seems to be, what does it look like? And I don't think that's a very good discussion to have. I can just promise you that I have been very consistent on the Second Amendment, and I will not flip-flop around depending on who I'm talking to.
With that, I would, just a closing thought, we've got a couple months till the election. Usually as we approach the election, everybody sits around and says, it's the lesser of two evils. I could live next to either one of these guys, I think. And I'd like to thank these two public servants for doing that. And I wish you both luck. Thanks for being here, guys.